All right, so now let's tackle what exactly is HTML and how do we use it to structure our websites. So no matter what you use as your browser, it could be Chrome, it could be Safari or Firefox, they all have a single purpose, and that's to interpret your files, such as your HTML files, your CSS files, your JavaScript files, into a website that should be displayed. For example, we've got a little bit of HTML code here that says that our website should have a title called Hello, and in the body, there should be a heading that says Hello World. So if we pass that code into our browser, it will open it and display it like so, with the title of the website usually on the tab bar, and that H1 or that big heading showing up in the body of our website. So before we dive deep into this, it's really important to remember that HTML is the foundation of all websites. So, for example, you won't see websites that are created using just a CSS file or just a JavaScript file, but you can create websites using just an HTML file. Now, it might not look great. It'll probably look like it came from the 90s, but it does enable your website to display text or various elements such as images or forms or tables, depending on how you code up the HTML file. So HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and the really important part here is the word markup, because there's many markup languages. For example, you might have heard of things such as XML, Extensible Markup Language, or GML, Generalized Markup Language, and all of these languages share a common history. They're based off the markup that used to be put into manuscripts, where editors would mark up the manuscript and either specify changes to the author or specify structure and layout to the publishers. So for example, you might have the squiggly line that shows the publishers that this part should be printed in bold or this part should be printed in italics. And HTML works in much the same way. You can specify the layout and structure of your website by using HTML tags. So if you head over to your browser and go to a website called codepen.io, then we can have a look and have a play around with real live HTML. So you don't have to sign up, just head over to codepen.io and then hit create new pen. And then we're going to change the view to a format like this. So this is the live version of our website. And these are the places where we're going to put our code. So as you can see, CodePen lets you put in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which will together get interpreted and get shown on the left as your website. Now, as we're only working with HTML at the moment, I'm going to minimize the CSS and JavaScript sections, and I'm just going to work from the HTML section. Now, we're going to need some text to work with, or to have something which we can give structure to. If you head over to gutenberg.org/ebook/1661, you get taken to The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by Arthur Conan Doyle. So one of my favorite books of all time. If you have a look down here, you can see that you can view the book as plain text, or you can read this book online as HTML. So this is what the plain text looks like. It has all of the text in the book, but absolutely no structure. But when we have a look at the HTML file, you can see that it has laid out the book with a structure that is more human readable. And this is what we're going to replicate using HTML. So if you go ahead and just copy this part, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and you copy it and place it into your pen, so in the HTML section here. Now, you can see that all of this text gets put onto the screen with absolutely no structure. And in order for this to start looking like this, we're going to start adding a little bit of HTML. So the first thing we can see is that this is the largest heading on the page. So we can make our website look like that also by adding an H1 tag into our HTML. So the tags start with angular brackets and end with angular brackets, and in the middle is the type of element or the type of tag you want to use. Now, it's really important that when you open tags that you should also close them, because as you can see here, I've got an open tag, but I have yet to close it, and it thinks that the entire contents of my page should be made into the largest heading possible. And that's not what I want. I only want it for this section, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. So in order to close the tag, it's the same angle brackets, but then I have to use a / and then write H1. So now only this part is an H1 or a large heading. Now, if we have a look at the other parts, I would say that this word by is a little bit smaller than the author name. So let's structure this as a heading also, but let's make it a subtitle. So let's make it a slightly smaller heading. And to do that, we can simply wrap this text around an H2 tag. And now we have Sir Arthur Conan Doyle as a heading, but in a smaller size and shown with less importance than the big title. So now, finally, we have this word by, and I reckon that's one size smaller than this heading. So let's go ahead and wrap this inside an H3. I hope you're starting to get the gist. The heading tags get smaller as the number goes up. So for example, if I change this to an H4, it gets even smaller, H5, smaller still, and all the way until H6, which is the smallest font size for the heading element. Now, if you keep going to H7, you'll notice that it doesn't do anything anymore. It doesn't change the heading size. And that's because the heading elements only go from H1 to H6. Now, how do I know that, I hear you ask? So this is a good point in the course to introduce documentation. And the reason why I'm talking about it so early on is because of how important it is to your journey as a web developer. So one of the key skills in becoming a great web developer, or in fact any sort of programmer, is getting good at finding out how you can help yourself. And a lot of that involves getting good at Googling. How do you find the specific piece of information that's going to help you achieve what it is that you want, or help you understand what it is that you want to know? So in this case, we're talking about headings, and we are using HTML. And I'm going to add in the name of the documentation that I prefer to use, which is MDN, and it stands for the Mozilla Developer Network. So the same people who made Firefox, for example. So if I go ahead and hit enter, you see a whole bunch of results come up. And the most relevant for us is the H1 to H6, and it talks about headings. So if we click on that, you can learn more about the heading elements used in HTML. And they even have example code snippets that show you what it would look like rendered in a browser. Now, there's a couple of sources for documentation. One is, of course, MDN. Another one is called W3 Schools. So let's see if we try W3 Schools with HTML, and we're talking about headings, right? Let's see what we get here. So HTML headings is the first result that comes up. And similarly, you've got the code examples, you've got the results, and you've got a little bit of notes that tell you how you should be using your headings. Both of these places have a lot of really useful usage notes. And it's worth reading through when you're first coming across a particular element. That way, you'll have a good foundation of knowledge when you start to build and create your own websites. So I want to show you one last resource that I quite like using, which is called devdocs.io. And this is basically a website that puts together a lot of the useful documentation in a structure that I find to be quite handy. So if we have a look inside the HTML5 tab, and we go into the elements, we can see that there's a total of 135 elements. And if you scroll down, you can see that we've got H1 through to H6. And if you click on any of these, then it brings up actually the MDN documentation. So you can see that it's similar to what we saw on MDN, but it's just structured in a very simple way, and it's very easy to follow. So that's definitely a website that's worth bookmarking. So if we head back over to our HTML file, we're going to change that back to an H3, which is an HTML tag that actually exists, as opposed to something like H9. So the next thing that we need to do in order to better replicate this website is to add some space between these lines. Now, in a word processor such as Word or Google Docs, you'll be able to simply just hit enter a few times or hit return a few times and get that spacing show up. Now, unfortunately, in HTML, it doesn't quite work like that. It's a little bit more complicated. In order to create that spacing, we actually have to use an HTML element called a line break, and it's written like so. And the interesting thing about this HTML element is that it doesn't require both an open and a close tag. So when we had the H1 through to H6 tags, you can see that we started out by marking the text with an H1 and then we closed it off with a closing tag. But the line break element works all by itself, and you can even put it inside like so to make this part go onto a new line. Now, this is a good time point to review the anatomy of HTML tags. All right, so let's talk about the anatomy of an HTML tag and break it down to its component parts so that we can actually understand how they're structured and how we can use them. So we've written HTML elements like so. So here we have the words hello world, and they're enclosed by an opening tag and a closing tag. And in between those tags is the content that we want to apply that structure to. So if you think back to the days of marking down a manuscript, it's exactly the same as putting down a squiggly line underneath certain words or phrases and asking the publisher to make it bolded to affect the structure of certain parts of the text. Now, in this case, the publisher just happens to be our browser. So these tags make requests to the browser asking it to structure and display our plain text in the way that the web designer wanted it to be shown. Now, the other type of tag that we just saw are tags that don't have a closing tag. They're expressed simply like so. And these are called self-closing tags. And we've seen that with the break tag, and there's a few more others that work like this also. Now, how do we find out if something requires a closing tag or is self-closing? Well, this is where we head to the documentation again. So if we have a look at the documentation for the heading elements, you can see that there's this part in the table that says tag omission, and it says that both the starting and ending tags are mandatory so that you can specify which portion of your text you want to apply this structure to. Now, if we have a look at the BR or the line break element, you can see that under tag omission, it says that it must have a start tag and must not have an end tag. So this is how we find out how we write our tags. Now, while we're here, I want to introduce you to another element called the horizontal rule, or the HR tag. And this will allow us to create these horizontal lines above and below our portion of text. So as you can see in the documentation, under tag omission, it also says that it must not have an end tag. So this is also a self-closing tag. Let's head back over to our pen so that we can add these two horizontal rules above and below our text. So the first one is going to go here, and the last one is going to go here. You can see that our web page now has two horizontal lines above and below our main portion of text. Now, if we have a closer look at this website, you can see that their horizontal rule is a little bit thicker than ours. So how can we make ours look more like theirs? Now, this is the part where I show you a neat trick. On any web page that you open in Chrome, you can simply right-click on the element that you're interested in and click Inspect in order to look at the HTML and CSS code that's being rendered in the background by the browser. So you can see here, they've got an HR element, horizontal rule, but they've got also all of this going on afterwards. What exactly is that? Now, we know that the first part of the tag is the HTML element, and it's BR or HR, whatever it is that you want to use. Now, the second part inside the angle bracket or inside our tag is new, and this is called an HTML attribute. And it basically gives more information to the browser to specify modifications to that HTML element. So in this case, we're saying that we want a horizontal rule, but we want it in size 3. Now, what does size 3 mean? And how do we know that we have these HTML attributes available to us? You've guessed it, we're going back to the documentation. Now, I know I'm making a big deal about going to the documentation, but it really, really is an important skill. Understanding and being able to look up the documentation, being familiar with the structure of it and where to look in order to find out how to implement or do certain things. If we have a look at our documentation for HR, you can see that there's this section called attributes, and that's what we spoke about just now. The attribute comes after the main HTML element and is separated from the element by a single space. In this case, the horizontal rule element has actually quite a few attributes, including a line, so you can specify whether if you want your horizontal line to align to the left or align to the right or be centered. You can specify the color of the horizontal rule. You can set whether if you want the horizontal rule to have shading or not, and you can also set the height in pixels of that horizontal rule, which is what we saw earlier on over here. So in this case, the reason why their horizontal rule looks different to ours is because ours is by default only 1 pixel high or 1 pixel in size, whereas theirs, if you inspect in the HTML, is 3 pixels in height. And they've also specified no shade, i.e. no shading to the horizontal rule. So if we want to make our website a seamless copy of what we see here, then we also have to specify those attributes. So if you remember, the horizontal rule is a self-closing tag. And so inside the tag, we're going to make a space, and then we're going to specify the name of the attribute, which we know from the documentation to be called the size attribute. And we're going to set it to equal 3 pixels. And then we're going to specify that it is no shade, i.e. no shading. And we know all of this from the documentation. So now, once our code updates, you can see that this brand new horizontal rule looks completely different from what it was before, and we can copy this over to the top as well, so that our horizontal rules look exactly the same as what we've got over here. So now we've seen HTML elements that require an opening tag as well as a closing tag. We've also seen HTML elements that have a self-closing tag. And finally, we've seen that HTML elements can also have an attribute where you can specify modifications to the default element. Now, all we need is just to add one final tag called center to our HTML file, and we would have now faithfully copied what this website looks like. So you can have a look through the HTML by, remember, right-clicking and inspecting in Chrome, and you can look through to see how they've structured the rest of the document as well. Now, this is a good point to mention our first challenge. So we've got this CodePen now where we've been messing around with the HTML. Now, you can either save this anonymously, or you can create a free account in CodePen in order to be able to access this later on. But I want you to create a brand new pen. And this pen is going to be our code playbook. And you're going to use this document as an interactive notebook, if you will. And I want you to document here all the new things that you've learned as we progress through the course. For example, in this and the last lesson, we learn about the H1 tag. So in our code playbook, the first thing that's going to go in is your H1 tag. And you can say that this is a level 1 heading created using the H1 tag. We can go ahead and close it off. And you can look through the documentation to perhaps copy some of these code snippets over, but make sure that whenever you're copying, pasting code, that you understand what the code does. There's nothing worse than copy and pasting code that breaks your website because you didn't understand what you've put in there. So we can go ahead and then modify each of these so that when we're creating our own websites and we want to come back to our playbook and have it as a point of reference, then we'll be able to see easily at a glance all of the elements that we've used and that we've learned about before. So my challenge to you is to create your very own code playbook and to start keeping notes on all the things that you're learning in this course. Now, sometimes with certain elements, for example, the line break, you won't be able to put any text inside the line break in the same way that we've done so for the H1 tag. This is a point where you can use a comment instead in your HTML file. Comments are portions of text which are marked out to be ignored by the browser. And they're usually places where you write notes to yourself or notes to fellow programmers who might be looking at your code. So in HTML, we create a comment by using the angle bracket, a exclamation mark, 2 dashes, and then to close off the comment, we use another 2 dashes and a closing angle bracket. And everything in between here is a comment. You can see that usually it gets highlighted in a different color, and none of it gets interpreted into the web page. So this is where you can put sections for your notes, for example, self-closing tags. You can make it into several paragraphs just by putting the closing tag at the bottom, and you can write notes on the elements as we come across them and keep this for your own reference. By the time when you're ready to create your own website, it will be a goldmine of a resource to jog your memory on all of the lessons that you've learned. So in the next lesson, we're going to be building our very first website. And it's going to be really, really awesome because we're going to be using a real text editor and we're going to be putting that website live onto the internet. So there's all of that and more yet to come. So I will see you on the next lesson. All right, so in this lesson, we're going to be building our very first website. Now, because we've only talked about HTML so far, so how to structure websites using HTML elements, and we haven't yet gotten to the part where we've learned about styling using CSS, then we're kind of limited in terms of the kind of websites that we can make. But fear not. Our websites are going to be right up there with the Internet Titans, but just way back in 1997. So do you remember what Yahoo looked like when it first launched? Or do you remember what Google looked like when it first came out? No? Don't remember? Well, there's a great website that can show you exactly that. And it's called the Internet Archive Wayback Machine. And you can find it at web.archive.org. Now in here, if you just enter the URL of a website that you're interested in, say yahoo.com, then it shows you what this website looks like all the way from 1996 to current day, which is 2017. Now let's have a look at what Yahoo looked like originally on the first day it was crawled, so 17th of October, 1996. So let's go ahead and click on that snapshot. And this is exactly what it looks like. So if we close off this frame, you can see it's almost like as if you've time traveled back to 1996 when Yahoo first launched and you were visiting this website for the first time. Now, as you can see, most of this is just pure HTML. It's a lot of structure and a lot of formatting, but it looks really ugly. But it's okay because it's a great place to get started with. This is the sort of website that we're going to be building by the end of this module. Now, I hear you say, oh, but this looks terrible. Surely nobody builds websites like this anymore. Well, this is an interesting anecdote that you might not know. If you have a look at some of the world's top computer science professors and you look at their personal pages that they've built, they all look a little bit like this, not so dissimilar from the websites in 1996. So this is Thomas Corman, who's a serious algorithm guy. And this is a website of John Kleinberg, another huge name computer science professor. And of course, the king himself, Donald Knuth, has a website that looks like this. So if it's good enough for these computer science titans, then it's probably good enough also for our very first website. By the end of this module, we're going to build a website that looks much like this. Something that we can put up online to show what we've done, our CV, as well as our hobbies and things that we like to do. So you can use it as a personal site or somewhere to list your CV online. I hope you're excited because I'm super excited. And once you're ready, let's go ahead and create our very first website. Now, once you're ready, go ahead and open up the Atom editor. Now, if you haven't yet installed Atom, this is a good point to go back and have a look at those videos on how to install Atom for Mac or for Windows. Because from here on out, we're going to be working with the Atom editor to create every single one of our websites. So it's really, really important that you have it set up with all the packages that we've specified in those installation videos. But once you've got it installed and opened, you should be looking at a screen like this. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to File and we're going to open a new project folder to work out of. So I want you to create a new folder, either in your desktop or somewhere else that you prefer, and it's going to be called Web Development. Go ahead and hit Create, and then select that Web Development folder and go ahead and click Open. And now you'll see your project folder show up in the sidebar over here, and you can toggle it closed by clicking on that arrow button over there. So now that we've got our Web Development folder, this is where we're going to store all of our projects. The first project that we're going to be creating is our personal website. So go ahead and right-click on the Web Development folder, and we're going to create a new folder inside the Web Development folder. And we're going to call our project HTML Personal Site. And now we're ready to create our very first HTML file inside this folder. So again, right-click on this tab, and we're going to create a new file. Now, as you get used to Atom, you're going to start to want to use some of their shortcuts. So for example, instead of right-clicking and selecting new file, you can also just simply select the HTML personal site and hit A in order to do the same thing. But in the beginning, as you're getting used to Atom, I'm going to be using a lot of the mouse controls so that you can see what's happening on screen. But feel free to start incorporating the shortcuts into your workflow. And as time goes on, you'll find that they make life so much quicker and so much easier. So now we're going to create our very first file. And you can see the way that the files are structured is that we're creating it inside this folder called HTML Personal Site. And inside that folder is where our web page is going to be located. Let's go ahead and create this home page. And by convention, we're going to name it index.html. And that is usually the name that developers will give their home page. So go ahead and hit enter in order to create that file. And if you open up this folder, you can see that's exactly where it's located. And it should open up on the right hand or the main pane over here as well. Now, in order to create any HTML website, there's a little bit of boilerplate code that's associated. Now, you can either write it all out, or because we installed the Emmet plugin, we can simply write HTML and then hit enter, and it will insert all of that boilerplate code for us. Now, if that didn't work for you, you could also hit the tab key after writing HTML or typing an exclamation mark and then hitting the tab or the enter key. Try some of these combinations that you see on screen if it's not working for you. And you're going to come to see and appreciate all of the powers of the Atom plugins and how helpful they can be. So now we mentioned that this is a standard HTML boilerplate code. Now in programming, we talk about boilerplates quite frequently, and it's similar to having a code template, something that you'll reuse for different projects. And it comes from the days when the printing press would make these heavy iron plates that would function as their printing template. And because they looked very similar to the small metal plate that identified the builder of a steam boiler, they called it the boilerplate. That's just where this word comes from. But when we're talking about it in programming, we usually mean a code template that you can reuse. Now, even though we didn't have to do very much work in order to get all of this into our file, it would still be a shame to lose it, right? So in Atom, whenever you see a blue dot on the tab bar of your file, that means that there's unsaved progress. And in order to make it disappear and to keep your progress, you can simply go to File and then click on Save, or use whatever shortcut that shows up for you over here. It should be Command S on Mac, and it should be Control S on Windows. For those of you who are interested, I've included a link to some of the most commonly used Atom keyboard shortcuts, and includes the commands for both Mac, Windows, and Linux for users of all three platforms. So go and have a look over there and start learning and using some of these shortcuts. And once you've saved your file in Atom, you'll see that little blue dot disappear, and now you can be rest assured that all your progress has now been safely saved. Now there's quite a lot of stuff on the screen, so let's talk about this boilerplate line by line to understand what it all does. So the first line here is where we declare the document type, and this tells the browser when it opens up this file what is the version of HTML that we're using. Now in this course, we're working with the latest version of HTML, which is HTML5. Now in previous versions of HTML, this doc type was incredibly convoluted. And in fact, I can show you what some of them look like. So we can write HTML for T, for example, and then because we've installed Emmet, if I hit tab, you can see this is what the boilerplate code for a particular HTML4 version would look like. And you can see that doc type is a lot longer, and very often programmers won't be able to remember that, so they actually have to look it up somewhere. But since HTML5, the doc type declaration became a lot simpler, and now it's just !doc type HTML, and this tells the browser to render this file as an HTML5 document. And there's a few differences between how things will appear or how things will be structured depending on whether if the doc type was HTML5 or a previous version. So that's the doc type. Now we inserted all of this code using autocomplete from Emmet. And if you want to look at all the other things that you can do with Emmet, then you can go ahead and have a look at docs.emmet.io/cheat sheet. And here you can see what all of those abbreviations look like and what is the result of it. As you're developing into a professional web developer, it's a great resource to have in order to save yourself a lot of time when you get used to using these common shortcuts. Now the next line in our code is an HTML tag, and this tells the browser that everything in between the opening and closing tags is going to be HTML code. And what does that code consist of? Well, it consists of a head and a body. Now the head is the part of the HTML file that holds information about the web page, and it tells the browser how it should handle the page. So for example, we might have a title tag in here that tells the browser what is the title of this particular document or this particular page. So let's go ahead and give our website a title. Let's call it whatever your name is. So mine is Angela, Angela's personal site. And now if we go ahead and hit save, we can have a look at it inside our browser. Now there's a couple of ways how you can open up the website that you're coding up inside your browser. Now one of these ways is simply going into your Finder or your Explorer and finding that index.html file and then double clicking on it, and it should bring it up inside Chrome. Now the other way of opening up your website is if you right click on your file inside Atom and you go to copy full path, then it copies the entire directory path to the location of your website. So if you just go ahead and paste it into the bar here, and here with this file path, we're telling the browser how to find this file index.html on our computer. So first we're telling it to go into a folder called users, then we're telling it to go into a folder called Angela U, then we're saying go to desktop, and then inside desktop we're going to web development, and finally we're going to HTML-personal site, and that is where we're going to find that index.html site. Let's go ahead and hit enter on that file path in order to do exactly the same as double clicking on this file, which is opening up our website inside Chrome. Now if Chrome is not your default browser, then when you see the icon, it's not going to have the Chrome symbol here. So you can change that by going into your settings, then scrolling down to default browser in order to change it. Now, at the moment, our website doesn't contain any content yet, but it does have a title, which you can see here. And it says Angela's personal site, which is what we created over here. Now, inside the head section, there's also this meta element. Now, there's quite a few different meta elements, but this particular one is called character set, and the one that we're setting it to is UTF-8. Now, what does this line do? The meta elements give extra metadata or associated data to your HTML document. And in this case, we're telling the browser when it opens up this file that all the text inside our web page is encoded using the UTF-8 encoding system. So this is basically a list of all the available characters that we can use inside our website for it to be rendered correctly. Now, sometimes when you open up a web page, especially in an outdated browser like Internet Explorer, or an email that you got from a Bulgarian friend, you might see some of the characters being jumbled up like this. And this is called mojibake. And it's a Japanese word that stands for characters that are transformed. And it occurs because your browser is trying to render the characters using the wrong character set. So, for example, if we have a look at this Wikipedia page for mojibake in Japanese, you can see that currently my browser is set to render all the web pages as Unicode, which is very similar to UTF-8. And you can see that everything looks pretty legit. It all looks more or less like Japanese. But if I decide to change the encoding of my browser and for it to interpret all the websites as something else, say Arabic, then you can see that all of this web page is now messed up. This is not a valid word, and none of this has any meaning because it's encoded the website incorrectly. So there's quite a few different types of encoding, and they're specialized for different languages because different languages use different symbols. For example, if you have a look at the Windows Greek symbol chart, then you can see that the symbol at position 224 looks like this. But if you have a look at the chart for Windows Arabic, then 224 actually encodes a completely different character. And that's why we get these messed up websites or strange looking emails when it's interpreted using the wrong encoding. Now, UTF-8 is the standard encoding that you should be using when working with HTML5. And the reason for that is because it includes all of those international symbols. And in fact, every single symbol that is included in the Unicode character set. So if you go to unicode-table.com, then you can see a table of all of the Unicode characters. And if you scroll down, it's got this nice little animation that shows you as we change locations, going from Latin, so most of the English-speaking countries, to Greek and Coptic, then going to Armenian, Hebrew, Arabic, and all of the different languages. The other thing about Unicode is that it also includes emojis. For example, if you have a look at the emoji chart, let's look for heart symbols, for example, then we've got all of these different emoji characters that we can also use on our website that's encoded with UTF-8. So let's go ahead and give that a try. Let's find a nice looking heart symbol. We can right click to copy it or hit Command C or Control C. And we can paste it to the front of our website title using Control V or Command V. And now if I hit save and go back to my website and hit Command R or Control R to refresh, or click this refresh button here, then you can see our title is updated with that emoji. So everything that is Unicode can be encoded correctly using UTF-8, and it's something that you should just have as your boilerplate code for any new website you create. This gives your website the maximum chance of being rendered correctly on browsers that are from international visitors. Now, if you're interested in doing a bit of background reading and learning more about Unicode and character sets, then this is a really good piece that I highly recommend by Joel Spolsky. It's a roughly 10-minute read, and it talks a lot about these character sets and how they encode different symbols and why you should be using something like Unicode or UTF-8 in your website in order to ensure maximum compatibility. So it's a good read, and I'll include a link to it in the resources for this lesson. Now, aside from the character set attribute for the meta element, there's also other attributes that you might see on different websites. So some of the common ones include description or things like keywords, about your website, who the author is, as well as viewport. And these meta tags tell the browser how it should render or display the web page. And also, they give information to search engines about the content of the website. So for example, if we go to the Mozilla MDN WebDocs website, the main page, developer.mozilla.org, and we right-click and we view page source, then we get to see the entire HTML file that's used to render this particular page. So this is what our browser sees and does all the hard work of making it look nice and pretty like this for us. So here, if you go ahead and hit Command F or Control F on Windows, you can search for the description attribute. Now, it's not this first one, but it is this third one, and it's this exact thing. And the description says, the Mozilla Developer Network, MDN, provides information about open web technologies, including HTML, CSS, and APIs. Now, if we go into Google and we search for MDN, you can see that the snippet of text that it shows about the main MDN website is exactly the same as what we saw just here in the description meta tag. And this is what search engines do. They crawl the HTML of your website and look for certain meta tags in order to know what your website is about and also how to display it in their search index. And there's a whole bunch of different attributes for the meta element, and you can have a read about it either on W3 Schools or what I recommend usually is the MDN WebDocs. So if you have a look at meta over here, then you can learn all about the different attributes, how to use them, and what they're good for. In the next lesson, we're going to be tapping into our body section and we're going to be creating the content for this personal site of ours. So for all of that and more, I'll see you on the next lesson. All right, so in the last lesson, we created the start of our beautiful personal website, and we're modeling off John Kleinberg's homepage. So the next step that we want to achieve is this. How do we put in a bullet list into our website so that we can list maybe the books and courses that we're teaching, in my case, or it could be your education background, which schools you attended, what degrees you attained, what courses you've completed, etc. So that's the next challenge. If you want, you can pause the video here and try to work it out yourself using MDN and Google search. Alternatively, you can follow along with me and we're going to go through the same process. So we're looking for a bullet list, maybe, and it's going to be in HTML. That's the language we want to write it in. And I'm going to use MDN as my documentation source. So if you hit enter, you can see that the first one that comes up is the UL element, and that's exactly what we want. UL stands for unordered list. So essentially a bullet point list. Now, ordered list would be something that has, A, B, C, or 1, 2, 3. But in our case, this is exactly what we want. And you can see that this is a simple example which will render like so, where the UL tag encloses all the parts that will be included in the bullet list, and the LI tag, or the list item tag, encloses each and every bullet point. Alternatively, you have a slightly more complex, more nested unordered list, and that looks more like this. So let's go ahead and add this to our code. So we've got this H3, that is the subtitle for the books and courses that we're teaching. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new UL, unordered list, and a new list item. And I'll add something like the complete iOS app development bootcamp. And then I'll go ahead and add another one, the complete And if we again hit save and check it out, you can see that they are there as an unordered list or as bullet points. All right, cool. So the next thing that I want to add is outside of the unordered list, I'm going to add another H3, and this is going to have the subtitle of, let's say, my hobbies. And here I want to have an ordered list that's 1, 2, 3, and it's going to list some of my hobbies. So can you try and use MDN as well as search to figure out how to do that and then list your hobbies in that ordered list? All right, so let's walk through it together. If we have a look at unordered list, if you scroll to the bottom, there's usually a part where it says see also on MDN, and this tells you these related HTML elements, which are list items and the ordered list, the OL. So let's click on that and we can see how this works. This is a simple example of an ordered list, and you've got the first, second, and third item as list items. So the format is exactly the same as the unordered or the bullet list, apart from the fact that this time replacing UL with OL. And similarly, you can nest these lists. You can nest a ordered list inside an unordered list, and also vice versa. And there's a whole bunch of modifications that you can have with your ordered list, for example, using Roman numerals instead of using numbers. And let's go ahead and put it into practice on our website. So I'm going to list a whole bunch of hobbies under a ordered list. And the first list item is going to be, let's say, beer brewing. And the next one will be martial arts. And the last one can be motorcycles. There we go. Cool. So those are my hobbies, and they're included under an ordered list inside list items. And if we go ahead and hit save and then hit refresh, you can see that we've got our ordered list and our unordered list inside our homepage. All right, cool. So this lesson was all about HTML lists. If you're interested, you can have a look at some of these other types of lists, such as the ordered lists which start at a particular number, or the lists that use Roman numerals, and you can mess around with that code inside your playbook or inside your website. In the next lesson, we're going to be covering the image element, and we're going to be brightening up our website with some pictures. So for all of that and more, I'll see you on the next lesson. So now that we understand how the HTML boilerplate works and what each line does in it, it's time to move into the body section and start giving our website some content. Because at the moment, our website is looking a little bit plain. So if we have a look at John Kleinberg's website, the first thing that we want right at the top here is a level 1 heading that says our name. So let's head back into Atom, and as a challenge to you, add a level 1 heading inside the body section of your website that contains your name. So this one's easy, and it's made even easier using the autocomplete features inside Atom. All I have to write in order to create an H1 tag, which is what's needed to create a level 1 heading, is I just have to write H1, and it makes a suggestion asking me, are you looking for heading level 1? And now if I hit enter or if I hit tab, I get the H1 tag inserted automatically, opened and closed for me, and my cursor gets moved right in between exactly the place where I would need to start typing. So now if I hit save and I head back over to my personal site, and remember, if you close down this tab, you can always go into your Finder or your Explorer to open it back up again, or you can select the full file path from Atom as well and paste it into here. Now, if I hit enter, you can see my H1, my level 1 heading gets shown up here, just like John Kleinberg's, and we're ready to move on to the next thing. Now, we want to have a line that shows our title, so who it is that we are. Let's head back to Atom. And firstly, I'm going to get rid of this little heart because it doesn't look very professional. And I'm going to add another HTML element under the H1. And this is a good point to talk about how to keep your HTML file neat and tidy. Now, most programmers are very serious about how to indent and structure their HTML files. And the reason for it is because having these indents makes it easy for us to see at a glance which tags are inside other ones. So for example, if we look at the top level here, we've got the HTML tag. And because both the head and the body tags are indented inside these HTML tags, it shows us at a glance that the head is inside the HTML element, and as is the body. But the body and the head, they're at the same hierarchical level. They're not inside of each other at all. And this is a good structure for us to be able to see at a glance what's happening in our code. And also when other programmers look at our code, because we're used to working with the same structure, it's easy to be able to understand what's going on at a glance. So you can see that there's one part of our code that breaks this rule, and that's this line here. Our H1 is contained inside our body element, and so it should be indented like so. And you can clearly see that this is now a child or contained inside the body tag. Now, if you didn't want to do that manually every single time, well, we actually installed a package right at the beginning that helps us with this organization. It's our little housekeeper, if you will. So if you go to Packages and go to Atom Beautify and click on Beautify, it will automatically beautify your entire code file to make all of the indents for you and to make everything look neat and tidy. So every so often, once your code starts getting messy, either learn the shortcut or go through it in the menu and reorganize your code file. It'll make it much easier on the eyes and much easier to read. So now I want to add my title under my H1 tag. And for this, I'm going to use the P tag, which is a paragraph tag. And the P tag formats text into a paragraph. So they get a new line and the text inside gets grouped together into the same paragraph. So let's add my title here. And now let's see what our changes look like. So remember again, Command S or Control S to save, and head back over to our site and Command R or Control R to refresh, or click this button to refresh. And there we go. There's our brand new paragraph showing up. Now, if we look at John Kleinberg's, you can see that his title is italicized and ours is not. So how can we make ours italicized as well? Well, this is where our lessons, our documentation is going to come in handy. Let's go ahead and go to Google and see if you can find out how to italicize your text using HTML. So let's write italicize HTML MDN and let's hit enter. And you can see that there's actually two tags that come up here. And the first one that comes up is this one. So let's have a look at it first. Now this is the EM or the emphasis element, and it marks text that has a stress emphasis. Now it looks like this in practice, and the result is that it makes it look italicized. Now you might have noticed back here, we also had the I element or the I tag, and it does the same thing visually. It also makes the text that's in between the I tags italicized. But there's a little bit of a difference here, and the difference is quite subtle. The emphasis tag tells the browser the words that are enclosed between it should be stressed or should be emphasized, but the I tag only italicizes the text, so it only styles the text to make it slanted, and it doesn't confer any of that emphasis. And for this reason, it's good practice to always use emphasis instead of italic, because it conveys more information and it isn't just about the style. Remember, when we're writing HTML code, we're more concerned about structuring our text rather than caring about how it looks or how it appears. Now, a similar pair is the B tag or the bold tag, and this is equivalent to the I tag. It makes any text that's in between bolded, like so. But instead, what you should be using is the strong tag. And that's because the strong tag, again, confers meaning. It says that this text has strong importance, and therefore it's displayed in bold, rather than merely saying that this should be styled so that it's darker than the rest of the text. And if you're interested, you can have a read between bold and strong, as well as emphasis is strong, as well as emphasis in italic. It makes for some interesting reading and gives you a bit more background information on the difference between these two tags. But whenever you're looking to make something bold in your website, you should probably be using the strong tag. And whenever you want to make something italicized, you should be using the emphasis tag. So let's go ahead and make our paragraph, this title, italicized or emphasized like so. If you remember, all we have to do is just to enclose it inside the EM tag. Now you can do that for the entire length of the text, or you can simply apply it to just a section of the text. So for example, if I wanted to make the part where it says the App Brewery bolded, then I can simply add a strong tag and have the App Brewery, not including the full stop, inside this strong tag. Now if I hit save and go ahead and refresh, then you can see that the entire paragraph is emphasized and the App Brewery is bolded. So we've done a little bit of formatting for our website. Now let's move on to the next part. We're going to add a little bio here, and that again is going to be inside a paragraph element, and it just tells anybody who's visiting our personal site who we are and what we're all about. So once you're ready, go ahead and figure out where you should add this and complete the challenge. Okay, so that wasn't so hard. All we have to do is just to indent so we're in the right position, we're inside the body tag, and we're going to create a new paragraph element. So this is going to be on a new line from this paragraph. They're going to be separate paragraphs. And here I'm going to write, I am an iOS and web developer. I love coffee and brew my own beers. Let's save and check it out here. All right, looks pretty good. And we're getting pretty far already. So obviously you can put as much or as little as you want here and design your website however you want it to look. Now the next thing I want to add is this horizontal line, and we've done that previously. So you can go ahead and add that into your code file as a challenge. All right, so do you remember how to do that? Well, all we need to do is we're still staying inside the body because we're creating the content for our website. And all we need to do is just to create a horizontal rule. So I'm going to use my good friend AutoSuggest, and I'm going to write HR and hit enter to insert a new horizontal rule. And now it's looking pretty similar to what we've got here. Now the last thing I want to add is a subtitle where I'm going to list all the books and courses that I'm teaching. Go ahead and add a level 3 heading to your website underneath the horizontal rule and call it books and teaching, or if you don't have any books and teaching, you can simply call it education and list all the schools that you've attended. All right, underneath the horizontal rule, I'm going to add an H3, so level 3 heading, and this is going to be the books and teaching. All right, so we've already got most of our personal site coded up. In the next lesson, we're going to be diving into HTML lists and how we can create these bullet points as well as numbered points and add it to our website. So all of that and more, I will see you on the next lesson. Well done for completing the first module. You've already come so far just by taking the first step, because you know that most people who buy online courses, they never get started. So you're already one step closer to your goal. But we all know that at some point later on, things will get more difficult. It will get more challenging. I can promise you this already. So how can you keep this current level of motivation that you have and be able to carry it through to the difficult times? One of the things that I find really helpful is setting goals and having my goals around me, like displayed on the wall while I'm working or while I'm studying. So I've created this fantastic worksheet for you so that you can start thinking about why you're doing this. Why are you learning to code? Why are you learning this skill? What will you be able to achieve once you've mastered it? And what would your life look like once that happens? So head over to the next lesson, fill out the sheet with your answers, and then print it out and put it somewhere where you can see it, so that when things become difficult and when your motivation takes a nosedive, you can have a look at it and remind yourself of why you're doing it in the first place. So head over there now. Now, if we compare our current site against John Kleinberg's, the only major difference that you will see now is that his has a whole bunch of hyperlinks interspersed in the homepage, whereas ours is completely devoid of any hyperlinks. If we think back to what HTML stands for, we've talked about the markup language part already, but we haven't yet talked about the hypertext part of HTML. So hypertext is basically just a bunch of text documents that can be linked together using these hyperlinks. So when you click on one of them, it takes you to a different text document, and then you click on a link there and it takes you to another different text document. And that's where the HT part of HTML comes from. And in fact, if you're interested, there's even a game called the Wiki Game, where you have a starting Wikipedia article and a goal Wikipedia article, and you have to click through the links on Wikipedia to try and navigate to the goal article. And it's basically an association game that's played using hyperlinks. Now, what are these links made of? If you have a look at each and every one of these links, if you right-click on it and click Inspect, you know that you can bring up the Google Chrome developer tools. And if we have a look, you can see that it's actually pointing towards a tag with a hyperlink reference to the destination that this link is going to take you to. And before the A tag gets closed, that's the link text. So in this case, it's the word computer science that gets underlined, and when you click on it, it takes you to cs.cornell.edu. Let's go ahead and implement this for our website. So there's many places where maybe you'd want to direct people away. So maybe I can link them to the App Brewery's website here. Or I could show them examples of me brewing beer or me riding motorcycles. Let's go ahead and try that in code. So the first place that I want to add a link to is this part where it says the App Brewery. So I'm going to put an A tag or an anchor tag just in front and close the A tag just behind. And if you want to have a look at the structure of the anchor tag, then as you remember, you can always go to the MDN web docs and you can read all about the anchor element and all of its attributes. Now, the main attribute that we're going to be concerned with is the href. And this is a URL that the hyperlink is going to point to, or the destination of that hyperlink. In my case, the destination is going to be appbrewery.co. And if I just copy that, then I can head over here and add an A tag or an anchor tag just before where it says the App Brewery. And this is what the autofill is going to write for me. So let's have a look at the structure in a bit more detail. As with the other HTML elements we've seen, the anchor tag has the A as the element name. And then the most important attribute that you're going to find yourself using is the href. And this is set to equal the link destination. So where are you going to take your user when they click on this link? And the anchor tag is not a self-closing tag, so it has a closing tag at the end. And between the open tag and the closing tag is our link text. So that's the bit of text that's going to be underlined and highlighted in blue so that the user knows that when they click on this word, this is going to take them to that link. So in our case, our href is going to be this URL. And between the open anchor tag and the closing anchor tag, we're going to put the link text, so the bit of text that's going to be underlined. And in my case, I'm just going to cut this phrase here and put it inside the anchor tag. So now you can see there's actually two sets of HTML elements that enclose this line of text. It is simultaneously going to be strong, i.e. bolded, and it's also going to act as a link to the appbrewery.co website. So if we hit save and let's go back over here and hit refresh, you can see that this has now been underlined and it's highlighted in a different color. Now, by convention, the highlight is going to be blue if it's a link that we've never clicked on, and it's going to be purple if we have clicked on it in the past. And just to confirm, if we click on it, it takes us to appbrewery.co. Brilliant. So that's working as expected. Now, why don't you go ahead and add some links to your hobbies? So, you know how they say in interviews you should always prove that you've done what you say you've done? Go ahead and add some links, maybe to images on the internet or to YouTube videos, anything that you like. And it doesn't have to be in your hobbies. It could be in your books and teaching or education or any part of your website, basically. So go ahead and pause the video and add some more links. So adding links to the ordered list or the unordered list is exactly the same as what we've done up here. So I'm going to go ahead and add an anchor tag to beer brewing. So I'm going to hit enter to create my anchor tag. I'm going to put the words beer brewing in between my anchor tag so that will act as the link text. And my href is going to be a YouTube video that I've got where I show people my beer brewing. So let's go ahead and copy that and paste it into here. And then I'm going to add another anchor tag here just to fill up the motorcycle part. All right, so now I've added two links, one for beer brewing and one for the word motorcycles, both inside my ordered list. So if we hit save and we hit refresh, then you'll see we've now got two links and they're blue because we've never clicked on it before. So if I hold down the command button on my keyboard or control on Windows and click on each of these links, then they'll open up in new tabs and we can have a look at my evidence that I have indeed done some beer brewing or motorcycling. Now that we've seen how to create some anchor tags that point to links on the internet, what if I wanted to create a separate page for the My Hobbies section, and I wanted to create a link that linked to my own page? Let's head back into Atom, and inside this HTML personal site folder where we've got our index.html, so this file, I'm going to right click and I'm going to click New File. And the new file is going to be called hobbies.html, and it's going to be created inside the same folder as index. So you can see they're at the same hierarchical level. Now for hobbies HTML, I'm first going to add the HTML boilerplate code, and the title is going to be My Hobbies. In the body, I'm just going to copy all of this, and I'm going to hit Command X or Control X to cut, and then I'm going to paste it over here. So now if I hit save for hobbies and I go back to the index.html and I create a new anchor tag, and it's going to have the link text of my hobbies, and the href is going to be the file name. So in this case, it will be hobbies.html. Now, if I hit save and I go back to my website, hit refresh, that ordered list has disappeared and is now replaced by this hyperlink. And if I click on it, it takes me to this brand new page that I've created called My Hobbies. So now you can see how you can really easily start to create multiple pages of your website. And as long as you've got it inside the same folder, or you can specify a path for the browser to get to it, then you can start linking up your homepage with all of these different satellite pages, and you start to build up a website rather than just a web page. As a challenge, I want you to create another page that is going to contain your contact details. So how do you get in touch? So say if somebody came across your personal site and they wanted to hire you or they wanted to message you. Now, it's probably quite cluttering to have it on the home page. So we want to create another link down here that says contact me. And it's going to link to another page just like my hobbies, but it's going to contain maybe your address, maybe your email, maybe your telephone, whatever you're comfortable with giving to the internet. Go ahead, pause the video and give it a go. All right, so it's going to be exactly the same as what we did for my hobbies. So we're going to go to our HTML personal site folder. We're going to right click on it. We're going to create a new file, and this is going to be called contactme.html. And here we're going to again start with the HTML boilerplate, and the title is going to be contact me. And in the body, we're going to have an H1, that's my contact details. And then below that, maybe a paragraph, that's going to be my fictional address. And maybe another one, that's going to be some fictional number, telephone number to contact me with. And then it will be my email at gmail.com. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and hit save. Go back to index.html and add another anchor tag where we link to this page called contact-me.html. And the link text will just be contact me. And we're going to hit save and refresh. And now we can click on here to this brand new page. All right, so today's lesson was all about the anchor tag, and be sure to check out the anchor tag reference on MDN Web Docs. And there's a whole bunch of other attributes that you can read about, and there's really good examples that can show you some of the other functionality that you can have by simply including the anchor tag. So that's all from me for today. I will see you on the next lesson. All right, so in the last lesson, we looked at how to use HTML lists that were ordered as well as unordered. In this lesson, I want to talk about the image element and how we can incorporate images into our website. So the image tag is, again, a self-closing tag, so it doesn't need to be closed. But for the image element, just providing an image tag isn't enough. You also need to specify the source. And that's the source of the image that will be displayed. That can either be a URL, so it can fetch it from the internet, or it can be a local image that's included in the same directory as your website. So we're going to look at both types. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look for an image of myself online, and let's have a look to see if there's any images that are actually me. Oh, there we go. So I've already found one. So this comes from my Twitter, and you can also probably go to your own Twitter or your Facebook, and you can right click on the image and simply copy the image address. Now, if I paste it here, you can see the whole URL of where that image is located. And if I hit enter, my browser will fetch that image from that location. But now, if I copy this image address or image source and I add it to my website as a HTML element, so just above my H1, so just above my name here, I want my image to show up. So I'm going to use the image tag, and the source, I'm just going to paste in that URL that I got from earlier on. Now, the next attribute here that comes up automatically is the alt, or the alternative text. And this is a case for, say, if a browser can't render the image, then it will simply display an alternative text to the user to describe what that image was about. So I'll just put the alt text as Angela profile picture. Now, if you're interested in search engine optimization and getting your website ranking for certain keywords, this is something that Google looks at to try and figure out what your web page is about. So if you're making a web page that's about burrito recipes and you add an alt text that says finished burrito product image 1, then it helps Google to index and figure out that maybe your web page is related when somebody is searching for burrito recipes. All right, so let's hit save and let's refresh and check it out. And I've now incorporated my first image onto my personal website. So you can either look around for an image of yourself on Facebook or Twitter or anywhere that would host it. Alternatively, if you can't find any images of yourself on the web, which is probably a good thing, you can also create an account on Photobucket and upload your own picture in order to get a URL. And after you do so, you can simply click on the image and right-click to copy the image address and paste it into your source between the quotation marks. It will work exactly the same. There we go. Angela is now a box of biscuits. Great. Now, when my browser looks through this file to see how it should load it up and display it, when it comes across this image tag, it has to go and ping the servers of Twitter to try and obtain this image. And if it gets permission to download this image, then it will grab that image and display it over here. So currently, my image is hosted on Twitter servers, and my browser has to download it from there in order to display it inside my web page. Now, what if Twitter goes down? What if they die? What if nobody wants to send tweets anymore? Well, then their server is going to be shut down, and my image will no longer be available for download, and you will instead end up with something that looks a little bit like this. And you might have come across it in the past when you've been loading up websites. It means that the image is no longer available or is no longer hosted at the address that's specified in the source. So in order to remove our reliance on Twitter, we can also put an image into our folder HTML personal site and refer to it inside our source. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, if I go onto my desktop inside web development, inside the folder HTML personal site, I can drag and drop or paste an image of me into this folder. And now my index.html and my picture called angela.png is in the same folder, and I can refer to it inside my code. So instead of using a web address as the source of my image, I can simply refer to the file name because they are at the same level. So index.html and angela.png are at the same hierarchical level. They're both inside my site. Now, if I had an images folder and I put my image into there, then I would have to add a path to get there. So it would be something like this. Both ways work, and you can do it either way you like. And now, if you hit save and you go to my site, you'll notice this image change from square, which is what it got from Twitter, to circular, which is what it got from my local file. Now, in my case, I'd cropped my image to a circle using Photoshop. But if you wanted to create your own circular image, you can use a tool like crop-circle.imageonline.co. And here you'll be able to upload an image and crop the part of the image that you're interested and get it as a circle and be able to download it to use it in your website. And there we go. We've managed to brighten up our homepage by adding an image of ourselves to the top of it using the image tag, and we've started to look at these HTML attributes. And you can see that every single HTML element in the MDN reference also has a section on attributes. And we're really only touching the surface here because there's other attributes that you can add to the image element or most other elements that you decide to use. And we're going to be looking at these attributes as we come across them for different HTML elements. Now, in the next lesson, we're going to be looking at anchor tags and how we can start adding links into our website and how we can create new pages that can be linked to from our homepage. So for all of that and more, I'll see you on the next lesson. All right, so how did that go? The first thing that we have to do is, of course, add our H3, and we're going to do that right above the horizontal rule, which is here, and below our table, so right here. And we're going to create something that's called skills, and then we need to make a new table. And this table is not going to have any headings because we don't have any headings over here, but it is going to have some rows and some columns. So let's make our first row using TR, and let's list our first skill inside a TD. And let's say iOS development. And then we can put our stars in a second TD that's going to be right next to our first TD in our second column. And we're going to pull up the emoji inspector, and we're just going to add in a star, which I'm going to copy and paste. And now, to save time, I'm just going to copy the row. Now, whenever you're programming and you're finding yourself doing a lot of copy and pasting, then you're probably doing something wrong. Now, in order to save time, you'll see me do it quite a lot, and it's because it's not very fun for you to watch me writing TR and TD all day long. But when you're coding yourself, ideally try and avoid copy and pasting. And when you do, always make sure that you understand what you're copy and pasting, and also make sure you check for any bugs and errors that you introduce. So let's edit some of these things. All right, cool. Let's hit save and let's check it out. Looks pretty neat, right? All right, so now let's tackle bonus points. If you've given it a go and you've managed to do it, then really well done. It takes a little bit of researching around and a little bit of lateral thinking in order to get it working. But if you haven't, or if you want to find out how one might do it, then take a look now. Essentially, what we're trying to achieve here is very similar to what we've done at the top. We're trying to affect the layout by using tables. So essentially what we want is a table that has 2 columns or 2 table data cells, and in each cell we have a separate table which itself has 2 rows and 2 columns. So the solution is essentially going to be a nested table. I'm going to make a little bit of space after the H3, and I'm going to create essentially the same structure as we've got up here. A new table that has a single row and 2 table data cells. This one and this one. Down here, I'm going to create a brand new table, and then I'm going to create a TR or a table row, and then I'm going to create 2 table cells. Now inside that first table data cell, I'm going to place our existing table. So I'm going to cut it and then I'm going to paste it in here. And then I'm going to grab another copy of this table and then I'm going to paste it into the second table data cell of the first level table. So right over here. Now, this structure is a little bit confusing, and this is one of the reasons why using HTML to affect the layout is not a great idea. But by doing this exercise, you do get to grips with using tables, table rows, table datas, and if you've managed to complete this challenge, then you should understand the ins and outs of how to create tables using HTML. So now if we hit save and let's take a look at our work, you can see that we've got a single table with 2 tables nested inside, and we've managed to achieve this kind of structure. Now feel free to keep this layout or revert to the previous layout before the bonus challenge. It's completely up to you, or even design it however you like, with as many tables as you need. But I'm going to get rid of this nested table because it makes it really complicated to see at a glance what's going on. So I'm going to remove this top level table, and everything below this closing table tag I'm going to delete. And I'm going to get rid of some of that space. And we're back at where we were before the challenge, and I'll hit save to continue from here. Let's finish off by just giving our tables a little bit more spacing so that everything looks a little bit more spread out. So go ahead and add the cell spacing attribute to both of your tables and give it a value of, say, 10 pixels. All right, so that's easy enough. We've done it before here. So we're going to add cell spacing equals 10 up here and also in this table as well. Hit save. Let's check it out. Nice. Looks pretty good, right? And finally, let's add a few more horizontal rules. So let's add one between books and teaching and work experience, and also one between work experience and skills. Okay, so let's find the end of books and teaching, and let's add a horizontal rule here. Let's find the end of work experience, and let's add a horizontal rule here. Hit save, refresh. There we go. Bit more spacing. Everything looks a little bit more padded out. All right, so if any of that was confusing or difficult, make sure that you watch the video again and also have a read of the MDN web docs on not just tables, but also T-head or T-body or T-foot or TD, THs, etc. So that you can have a look at the example code and see some other examples of how you can use tables and rows and cells. Now in the next lesson, we're going to learn all about HTML forms and how you can add these to your web page to collect data from your users. So all of that and more, see you on the next lesson. So now that we've got books and teaching or education and work experience listed in chronological order, the next thing that might be nice to add are listing some of the skills that you have. So I want you, as a challenge, to create a table where you've got an H3 for the skills subtitle, and then you've got all your skills listed in a column on the left, and on the right you've got some rows where you've listed using emojis to show how familiar you are with each skill, ranging from 5-star to 1-star. Once you're done, you should have a website that looks something like this. So you've got your H3 as a subtitle, and then you've got a table that lists your skills as well as the number of stars that you would rate yourself. And to get bonus points, you can also use tables to affect the layout of your skills so that you end up separating your skills into 2 columns and making it look a little bit like this. And this is what you should end up with, or rather this is what you're aiming for. So I've added an extra skill so that we have 4 skills, and they are laid out side by side so that there's 2 columns of these skill sets. And it's really important to note these 2 sections should be distinct from each other. So if you added a 1 pixel border, this is the structure that you will see. 2 sets of skills side by side, distinct from each other. So if you want to give that challenge a go, then this is a good time to pause the video and give it a try. Now, the other thing that I want to do with the website is if we have a look at Thomas Corman's site, you can see that he's got his picture on the left and his name and his title and his blurb next to that image. And that's quite a nice layout. So we can do that here as well. We can have our image on the left and all of this on the right next to the image. Now, because we haven't yet spoken about CSS and styling, if we wanted to only use pure HTML to affect how this part of our website looks, then we can use our tables to do that. So let's go up here where the body of our website begins, and let's add a table. Let's add a table row. And inside this row, it's only going to have 2 table cells or TD elements. And the first TD element is going to contain the image. And the second TD element is going to contain all of this up to the horizontal rule. So let's just cut it and paste it into here. Now we can hit save and let's refresh our page. And you can see that we're getting close to this kind of structure where we've got a single table with only 2 columns and 2 cells this being one cell and this being the other cell. And that allows us to get this kind of layout for our website. Now you can see here that there's a little bit of a gap between the image and the text, whereas on our site, it's right up and next to the image. Now, if you wanted to increase that distance, then you can achieve that by changing the table's cell spacing. And if you have a look in the attributes, you can see this attribute called cell spacing, which defines the size of the space between two cells in a percentage value or pixels. So let's go ahead and add some spacing to our table. So inside our table element, we're going to use cell spacing, and let's set it to equal 20 and hit save. And then let's go and have a look. Nice, that looks pretty good, right? All right, so previously we managed to get our website to include images as well as links. So we added these image tags as well as anchor tags, which can take us to external sites, but also to internal sites, like the brand new My Hobbies page that we created, or the Contact Me. Now in this lesson, we're going to take things a little bit further. In our personal site /CV, I want to have a section where we can list our work experience, so what we've done and when we've done it. Currently, if we went into our code and say below that unordered list and we add a H3, let's call it work experience. Now, say if we added a standard paragraph tag and we said maybe 2010 to 2013, let's say lead developer at Tempo app. So let's save that and take a look. And if we refresh, then it looks like this, which is all well and good if we have that range. But what if I wanted to add something where I didn't have a year range? Say if it was 2010 when I worked as a researcher at Institute of Cognitive Neurosciences. So let's save that and let's refresh. And you can see that it looks really awkward, right? Like this part and this part, they're not really indented at the same level horizontally. And everything just looks really messy. So how can we implement something that looks nice like this, where there's even a bit of padding in between and everything looks really regular? Well, one of the ways that we can achieve this using just HTML is to create a table. So if we have a look at the docs on MDN and we look at table, you can see that a very simple table just looks like this. This is a bog standard simple table. But tables can get really complicated as well, and you can use it to structure and represent data in your website. So we could have table headings, we could have different cells, we could have column groups and columns, we can have captions, and a whole bunch of things. So let's try and add a table to our website so that we can make our CV look a little bit more like this. So let's first add a horizontal rule here between our table and these two links. And let's use autocomplete to add a table tag for us. Inside a table, we can create table rows and also table data, which are essentially like cells. So say if we create a brand new table row, and it's really helpful that AutoSuggest actually tells you what each of these tags are. So let's go ahead and hit enter. So this is a single row. And if I want to create another row underneath, then I would just have to create another TR. Now inside the top row, I'm going to have two table data elements, or rather two cells in this single row. And to represent the cells, I'm going to use the TD or table data element. So the first cell is going to contain my date, and the second cell is going to contain what I did. So that's our first row complete. Now let's go ahead and create another two cells or another two TDs inside our second row. So let's again copy and paste the date and the work into the table data elements. And I'm going to delete these two paragraphs. Let's hit save, go back to our website and hit refresh and see what it looks like. Okay, that's already looking a lot better than before, right? It being a table means that our columns are structured together. So these two lines are structured so that they are indented to the same place, and it makes it look so much neater than before. Now, aside from having just rows and cells, tables also have headers, body, and footer, mirroring what we have for our HTML websites. And you can declare them quite simply by writing thead for table head, and tbody for table body, and tfoot for table footer. Now, inside the table head, we can add some titles to each of our columns, and they get formatted by default in bold. So if we create a new table row, and inside this row, instead of creating table data or TD elements, we're going to create TH elements, or a table header cell element. And inside here, we're going to give the name of our first column, which is going to be dates. And then we're going to create another table header cell, and this one is going to be the work that we did. So let's hit save and hit refresh, and you'll see that we now have table headings for each of our columns. Now, for those of you guys who might have been playing around with this code, you would have realized that if I cut this table row, and instead of putting it inside the header, I actually put it just inside the main table, and I delete all of this, and we hit save and we hit refresh, you'll notice that it looks exactly the same. And that's because we're using these special elements, the table header cell elements, and most browsers know how these should be formatted. So it looks exactly the same. But the reason why we might have different sections of our table, for example, putting these cells inside the table head and putting these inside the body, is because sometimes we might want to select and isolate the table header and the table body in order to style it differently or make it function in a different way. For example, if we separated the table header from the table body, we can use some code to isolate the header and fix it in place so that when users scroll through our table, we can keep these headings on screen. Now, that requires a little bit more fancy stuff like CSS or JavaScript, which we'll wait until later modules to talk about. But it's a good reason to be aware of why you might want to place the header cells inside the head, the main body of the table inside the body, and maybe some footer cells into the table footer. And generally, this is the structure that you'll see for most tables, with a head and with a body. Now, if we have a look at these tables on the MDN developer docs, you can see that they've got outlines, whereas what we've created doesn't have any borders or boundaries or outlines at all. If we take a look at the MDN developer docs for the table element, you can see that there's a whole bunch of attributes, such as background color, or border, or cell padding, cell spacing, and a whole bunch of things that you can apply to the table element to change its appearance. But if you take a closer look at each of these styling attributes, then you can see they all have a little thumbs down sign next to them. And this is because all of these attributes for the table element are deprecated. And you'll hear that word quite often in programming across many different languages and disciplines. And what that word means is that it's almost like it's downgraded. It's something that they no longer recommend you using. And the reason is because we have to always keep in mind that HTML is for structure, CSS is for styling, and JavaScript is for behavior. And even though it's possible to affect the style of your website through using HTML attributes or through using different HTML elements, you have to try and resist when you can. But since we haven't yet learned about CSS, I want to take you to the primitive days before web designers had access to CSS, what they might have done using just HTML. And if we scroll through these attributes, you'll come across something called border. And this defines in pixels the size of the frame that's surrounding the table. We can add this attribute to our table element, not tothead or table row or table heading cell or any of the other ones, because we're currently reading the table docs, remember? And we can add it and say border equals 1 pixel, let's say. And if we refresh our site, then we'll see this incredibly ugly HTML table that you'll see a lot in websites from the 90s. So let's get rid of it. Let's just quickly recap the HTML structure for creating a table. To start off, we create this table tag and we also close it. And everything in between is the actual contents of our table. This just creates a simple table. Now, by default, your browser will style the table to not have any borders or padding or anything style related. Now, in order for our table to actually start holding some pieces of data, we're going to have to create something called a table row. And between the open and closing TR tags is where the data for that row is going to go. And this section of code will just create a single row inside our table. Again, with no associated styling. So if there's nothing between these two tags, then you won't actually see anything appear on screen. Now, the next part is our table data, or rather our table cells that we create using the TD tag. And in between the open and closing TD tags, we place the actual data that's going to go into that cell. And this is a single table cell that's going to contain the words Angela, and it's going to go inside the first table row. And so over here. And as you populate your table with more rows and more data, then you will see this structure reflected on your website. So the biggest hurdle that you have to get over is that there are no table columns. All that you're doing is going from top to bottom, defining new table rows. And inside each row, you're putting in individual cells. And each cell gets placed horizontally, one after the other, creating effectively the columns. While the main job of tables is to display structured data, you can also see how you could use it to affect the layout of the various HTML elements on your website. And that's what we're going to look at in the next lesson. Now let's structure our form so that it looks like a proper contact form. So let's again add a horizontal rule to divide the top part from the bottom. And then in our form, we want a label that says your name. And then after that, we're going to get rid of this color, but we do want that line break. And then we've got a label that says password. Maybe we should ask them for your email. Maybe that'll help us get back in touch with them. And instead of password input type, we're going to change that to email. And to do that, I have to use something that's not actually an input. Instead, it's an HTML element called text area. So let's add a label first, and let's say your message. And text area has two attributes that are really important. One is the number of rows, and the other one's the number of columns. So rows determine how tall your text area should be, and columns determine how wide it should be on your web page. I'm going to stick to maybe 10 rows and 30 columns, but if we hit save, you'll see that it's actually something that you can modify. And I'm sure you've seen these text fields all over the internet. Anywhere where you have to put in a long answer, you'll get something that looks like a box, and you've got these few lines in the right corner. And what you can do is you can click and drag it to make that text field as large or as small as you want it to be. But the default, or the starting position, is defined by the developer. It's looking a little bit messy. Let's add a few more line breaks so that we can space things out a little bit and make it look a little bit more appealing. All right, so that looks a little bit nicer. I know it's still very bare bones, but at least it's starting to take shape. Now, the only problem is that at the moment, when you hit the submit button, What it does is that it'll take you back to your home page. And the reason is because when we created our form, it has this attribute called action, i.e. what should happen when you click submit. And at the moment, the action is simply take the user to the index.html page. And that is, of course, our home page. Now, without knowing anything about CSS or JavaScript, we can't actually get very deep into understanding what the method or the action means. But you kind of want it to have some basic functionality, right? Because otherwise it doesn't make any sense to anybody who's going onto our website. And even though this is our first website, it doesn't mean that it can't function or do something very simple. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the form action to a mail to. And what mail tos do is that when you press the submit button, they'll open up your default mail client. So that could be Mail on Mac, or it might go into Gmail if you're inside Chrome. And it puts in the email address that you specify after the colon here. And the post in this case simply means that we're going to transfer what the user types into these input fields into the email client. If we hit save, I'll show you what it looks like. So let's go to contact me and let's give my name, my email, and my message. Now, if I hit submit, you can see that it opens up my mail app and adds a little bit of text into the body of the email. Now, if when you hit the submit button, you don't see any pop-ups, you don't see a mail application, or if nothing happens, then it could be that there might be an error in your code, so go back and check that. But more likely, it might be because you don't actually have a mail application installed on your computer. Now, if you're using a Mac, by default, it comes with the mail application. But if you're on Windows, you might actually not have a mail application installed. So if you don't want to install a separate mail application, then the best solution for this is to actually set Google Mail or Gmail as your default email application, because let's face it, most of us have a Gmail account, right? So now I'm going to show you how to do that. So first you need the Chrome browser open, and then you go to these three dots here and then go to settings. Now here you're going to click on privacy and security and then go to site settings. Now, sometimes I've seen this called content settings, but it should have this little symbol. And if you click on it, it should take you a page with the permissions. If you scroll to the bottom of the permissions, click on additional permissions, then you can go to the protocol handlers. It might also be called handlers. But keep an eye on this little icon. We're going to need to remember it for a little bit later on. Now go to the protocol handlers and make sure that sites are allowed to handle protocols. So make sure this is selected, and if not, go ahead and click on it. And then we're going to have to make sure that in the section where it says not allowed to handle protocols, that our mail.google.com is not here. So if it is like this, go ahead and click on the X to remove it. So now if you have any Gmail tabs open, go ahead and close it down. And then we're going to go to a new tab and head over to gmail.com. So now when this loads up, you should see a little symbol here. Remember that symbol I asked you to remember? So if you click on it, it says, do you allow mail.google.com to open all email links? And you should click allow and then click done. Now I found a site to test mail to links, and you can of course use the website that you've created. If you click on the mail to link, it should take you to a new tab, and it should pre-fill all the information that we want it to, and it should work as expected. Now, alternatively, if you don't have a Gmail account or you don't want to use Gmail as your default email client, you can also install an email application, which takes a bit longer. So in the Q&A section for this lesson, you can find text-based instructions for what I've just done, and you can find that in the featured questions section. So now that we've got this working, we can carry on. Now, it's not making too much sense right now. And in order to change that, we actually have to add a little bit more to our form. So I'm going to delete this class, and I'm going to add another attribute called encoding type. And this specifies, just as up here, we're specifying that our website is encoded in UTF-8. We're going to say that the data in our form is encoded in plain text. So that way, when it launches the mail app, you won't have these funny percentage signs and numbers. You'll instead just have plain text. Now, the other thing we need to add is a value to each of these name attributes, because that's going to identify the data that's inside each of these inputs. And I'll show you what I mean. So let's add the name as your name. Second one, your email. And the third one, your message. All right, let's hit save. And let's go back to our website, hit refresh, and let's try it again. Now, I didn't show you this last time, but the cool thing about the email text field that we added here by changing the input type to email is that it does some basic validation. And that means if I type something like this and I try to hit enter, now it's a little bit different from browser to browser, but your browser might tell you that please include an @ in your email address, because all email addresses have @ right? And then it says, please enter a part following the @ All emails have something after the @. And it says emails don't contain these weird symbols, so you're probably not entering a correct email, or make sure that you check. So that's our email, but even though it's not a real email, it passes those basic validation checks. But we got all of those validation checks for free just by changing our input type to email. So it's already a pretty good deal. And later on, we'll show you how to make that validation a little bit more sophisticated. But it's already kind of cool that we have that. And then we'll add an email. So let's say, hey there again. And now hit submit. And you can see now, because we've added something to that name attribute, where we said your name, your email, your message, what we added here and here and here, now when we submit our form and we post this data that the user has inputted to our mail client, then it knows how to classify each bit of the data, i.e., this input should be labeled your name, this input should be labeled your email, and your message should be labeled like so. So this is a really, really basic little bit of functionality that we can get without yet understanding about JavaScript. So once you get to the JavaScript module, we're going to come back and revisit forms, and we're going to unleash the full power of HTML forms. But for now, this is a neat little bit of functionality that when we publish our website, it'll still work well enough for anybody who's actually coming onto our personal website or personal page. Now, in the next lesson, we're going to be launching into our intermediate HTML challenge. So we're going to be getting you to recreate a web page using all of the things that you've learned in this module. So for all of that and more, I'll see you on the next lesson. All right, so I've added a few more details here and there to this personal site, and it's now really coming along and starting to look like a real website that you might come across browsing the web. Now, the next thing that I want to do is when we go to the Contact Me page, it's a little bit sparse at the moment. It's only got my fictional address, my fictional number, and my fictional email. Now, what if I could add a form at the end of this, where I allow people to put down their name and their email, and they could message me using that form? How would we do that in HTML? So, of course, first place to head to is the MDN web docs, and we've got our form element. Now, you can read through all of these attributes and start getting an understanding of how a form works and how you can put one together. Now, in order for forms to really come alive and to work as you would expect them to, it actually requires a little bit more than just HTML, because we need to specify the behavior of the form. We can design the form and we can structure the form for our website, but until we learn about JavaScript, we won't be able to tap into its full functionality just yet. But we can get pretty close. So let's go ahead and create a brand new form inside our contactme.html page. Just below the last paragraph tag, let's add a brand new form, And you can see that with the auto suggest, these are the default things that come up. Now I'm going to keep them as they are. We're going to go inside the form tag and we're going to create our first label. Now our first label is simply going to be called your name. So this is where we ask our user for their name input. And in order to store that information or allow them to type that information, we need to add an input. And the type of input is going to be text. So it's just going to be a text box that allows them to put in their name. And if we hit save and check out what our website looks like at the moment, then you can see we've got our label here and we've got a box where somebody can type in some inputs. Now the thing that we're missing is a submit button. Now a submit button also falls under the inputs of a form. And you can see it right here. It's simply an input. Instead of having a type of text, it has the type of submit. And all you need to do is to change the word text to submit and delete the value attribute and hit save and refresh. You'll see that you get this submit button without having to put in any extra effort. So that's the beauty of some of these form inputs. And we can check out some of the other ones inside the docs by going to the related topics, and there's loads of different types of inputs. There's buttons, which are inputs, there's checkboxes, color, date. Let's give some of them a try and see what they look like on screen. Just before the submit button, let's add an input that has type maybe color. And of course, remember, you have to spell it the American way with a single O instead of OU. So let's hit save and refresh. And you can see we now have a color picker on our website. And when you click on it, it brings up the color picker where we can select any color we like. And you might submit a form that maybe has your favorite color or change the website using a color picker input. Another cool one is the checkbox. So we can add a checkbox by using input and changing text to checkbox. Hit save, hit refresh, and you can see we now have a little checkbox. So you can have a line break here, forcing this to go on to the next line. Let's create a label where it says, do you want to sign up to the email list? And hit save, refresh. And you can see you've got this classic checkbox. Do you want to sign up to the email list? Check or uncheck, and hit submit. Or you can put something like, have you read the terms and conditions, or any other thing that might fit with a checkbox. Now, the last one that I wanted to show you before we proceed was the password input. So let's delete the checkbox and let's add a password input. The cool thing about the password input is that when you type anything inside this box, ideally you'd want a label, of course, here to show that this is the password. But we know this is a password field because you can either right-click and hit inspect, and you'll see that this is our password input, or you know that the next thing that comes after the password label is, of course, the password input. But whenever you type anything in here, by default, everything you type is masked. So these are for fields where you don't want somebody overlooking the user to be able to see what their password is. Feel free to have a bit of fun and try out all of these different input types and see what they look like and see what they do. And once you do that, you'll come to realize that a lot of the things that you see on the web are just very simple HTML inputs. And as we build our knowledge in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, we're going to come back and see how forms work in more detail. So have an explore of that and see what they all look like when you just add them to your website. But we'll experience the full functionality a little bit later on. Now, let's just quickly review what we've learned about HTML forms. We use the form tag to define what should go into our form. And this by itself doesn't actually do anything. So in order for the form to do anything, you'll need two important HTML elements, and that's the label and the input. And between the opening and closing label tags, you can write some text that will be displayed as a label inside your form. The next most important HTML element that's associated with forms are the inputs. And the input is a self-closing tag, so it doesn't have a closing tag. Instead, you can define the input type by using the type attribute, and there's a whole bunch of input types that you can tap into to use inside your form. For example, in this case, the type is set to text, so we get a text box where the user can input their name. But you can also use an input element that has the type attribute set as submit, and this creates a button. So you can see that by setting the attribute type to various predefined keywords, you actually end up with completely different things on your website. And it might seem strange that even though we're using the same HTML element, i.e. the input, we're actually getting completely different objects on our website. Anywhere from text boxes to buttons to color pickers and a myriad array of different things that we can create just by changing that type. Now, aside from just the text and submit input types, if you have a look at the MDN docs, you'll see that there's loads more different keywords that you can use. For example, the input type where you allow the user to upload a file, or the date picker, or the radio button, or a range. And you can see that I've only got static images in my slide to show you what they look like. But I want you to look through the MDN documentation for the input HTML element, and I want you to create a new HTML file that you're going to put onto your desktop, and you can open it in order to see it live in action. For example, the date picker now works and my range can be toggled. I can switch my radio button on. I can choose a file and a whole bunch of things. So use it as a living notebook, if you will. That should have been really easy, and just to quickly show you, this is what you could have created in order to achieve this. Now, at the moment, we're not yet looking into the other attributes for our form or for our inputs, and we're only changing the type attribute to some of these predefined keywords that you can see are listed on the MDN developer docs. In the next lesson, we'll look closer at how forms work and how you can capture and reveal what the user has chosen for each of the inputs. So for all of that and more, I'll see you on the next lesson. Hey, well done for completing yet another module. This is really exciting. You're getting really into the course now. Now, I want to share with you one of my ways for building a good habit, because if we think about it, learning to code, it requires daily, almost constant effort, right? Ideally, if you could spend 100 days and you spend 1 hour a day learning to code or coding something of your own, then you're going to become so much better than if you just, did it one weekend and then forgot about it, right? So the difference between these two scenarios is if you're able to build a habit. And once we have a habit, you almost don't have to think about it anymore, right? Like you don't think about it in the morning like, oh, do I want to brush my teeth or not? I don't know. Is it one of those days where I brush or not? You don't think about that because it's a habit. You just wake up, you just do it. So how can you make coding or learning to code a habit? One of the things that really helps me is to mark a line in my calendar. And I think this is actually something that came from Jerry Seinfeld, like the comedian dude, where he said that every day he writes a new joke, he puts a line through, his calendar. And by continuing that line, at some point, you're not going to want to break the chain because it's like, man, I've done like a 10-day streak. How hard is it just to do one more day? And I don't know if it's because I'm kind of OCD, like I just like seeing things like completed. I sometimes like just write to-dos in my to-do list that I've already done, which I haven't written in my list, but just to be able to tick it off. Yeah, let me know if you can relate. But even if you can't, most people actually benefit from continuing a streak. And by about 30 days or 40 days, that thing that you had to constantly think about, like, oh, do I have time today to code? Do I want to do it? that kind of just becomes a habit. And you just know, oh, this is the time where I get sat down and I start coding. And it doesn't actually take that much motivation anymore. So try and give this a go and see if it helps you. But the most important thing is to just keep going. I keep saying it, but at the end of the day, if you show up, if you do the work, then you're going to get the results. So I'm here cheering for you. I'm sure other people are. I think you're doing great and you're going to do even better. Now that we've completed the HTML section and we have our completed website, but we can only access it locally because when we open up our index.html, you can see that we're just opening a local file, right? In this case, this file's inside my users folder, inside my username, inside my desktop. But that means nobody else can actually access this website, which makes it a bit pointless, right? The whole point of a website is so that we can put it onto the internet and everybody will be able to see our personal site or our CV. So how can we do this? Well, in order to do that, we need to host our website somewhere. Now, there's a whole bunch of hosting sites such as GoDaddy or Bluehost, but because we're learning at the moment, we don't want to have to pay for this. So there's also a free solution that I'm going to show you. By the end of this lesson, you're going to have your personal CV up on the internet, proudly displayed somewhere, and you'll be able to share a URL or a link to it so that anybody across the web can be able to access it. But first things first, we'll need to do a little bit of setup. The service that we're going to use is GitHub. And we're going to talk about GitHub in a lot of detail a little bit later on. It's a really, really useful tool that is pretty much essential to a developer's workflow. But for now, we're only going to use one of its features, which is hosting our website. So first and foremost, if you don't have a GitHub account, then you'll need to set up a new one. So I'm just going to set one up while we're at it. And now it'll ask you to choose a plan. Now we're going to choose the free plan. And then we're going to click continue. Now I'm going to skip this questionnaire and just click on skip this step. Now, once you have signed up to GitHub, it's really important that you go ahead and verify your email address. So check your emails and see if you have something from GitHub and then click on that verify link. And once you've done that, you'll be able to add new repositories to GitHub. If you head over to the upper right corner and just click on the plus button, and then we're going to create a new repository. This repository, I'm just going to call it CV, and this is going to be the name of my project. And all that a repository is, it's simply just a folder out there on the cloud that's going to store all of your project-related files. And you'll be able to make changes to the files and update the files, and you'll be able to track all of those changes that you've made in the past. Now that we've given our repository a name, then we're going to leave the description as empty, and then we're going to keep public selected. And then down here, make sure that you check this box where we initialize this repository with a README. And it's really, really important that you do this for the next few steps to work. So now that we've done all of that, we're going to go ahead and click on Create Repository. And this will take just a moment, and now you should see a page that looks like this, which means that your repository has been created. And the only file that's in your repository is just a README file. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and upload our files for our CV website. So now if you bring up the folder which contains your CV website, so the place where you see your index.html, your images folder, and any other pages you have, you're going to select all of these and you're going to drag it into this box here. And that will upload and add all of them to our online repository. Once that's done, we're going to give this particular version a name. So we'll say that in this version, we added initial CV website files. And then go ahead and click to commit these changes. And that will upload all of those files that we dragged on, and we are now ready to set up our GitHub page. If you head over to the Settings tab here, you will see that there is a section called Pages. And GitHub Pages is designed to host your personal, organization, or project pages from a GitHub repository. So we already have the repository, we now have to activate our pages. So it's currently disabled. All we have to do to enable it, we just have to select a source where our files reside. So if you click on this part where it says none, then select main as your branch and go ahead and click save. So now GitHub is going to do some behind the scenes stuff, and it's going to be publishing towards a place which is going to be your username.github.io/your project name. So that will be your CV. And you can see this is a HTTPS website, so you'll be able to access this site from anywhere across the world as long as you're connected to the internet. Now, this publishing process takes a little while. You'll see that it says your site is published at this address, and if you click on that address, you should be able to see your website show up. Now, if at this point what you see instead is a 404, then that just means that you have to be a little bit more patient. The GitHub servers are probably working overtime, and come back in maybe half an hour and check that link again. But once you are done though, then your website should work exactly as it did locally. But now you can go ahead and share this link with anybody you like across the world, and they can access it because it's now hosted on the internet. So you can go ahead and go over to angelabauer.github.io/CV, and you too will be able to see this website that I just uploaded and I'm looking at right now. Now, if after half an hour and you click on this link and it still doesn't show your website, or there are some inconsistencies on it, then you might have to troubleshoot your setup because you might have made a mistake somewhere. Now, the first thing I want you to check is to go to the code tab here and make sure that your file, which is your home page, is actually called index.html, and it should have a lowercase I, and it should be spelled exactly like this. This is very important because GitHub is going to look for a file with this name in order to serve as your home page. So if you don't have that, then go into that file and click on this button and you can edit the name. Now make sure at the very end you create a message for this change and then click on commit changes. Now while we're here, if you see this doctype HTML showing up at the top of your website, you can also edit it here and simply delete that. This is something that is useful for our editor, but not necessarily important if we want to publish the website. Now another issue that people have is their images don't show up. Now this could be because when you created the home page, so if we look in index.html, the reference for your image, this source, you set it to something local on your computer, like C drive, /images, etc. But in this case, we actually have to make this relative to the position of this file. So you can see I'm referring to a folder called images that's on the same hierarchical level as this current file, and then inside that folder I'm looking for an image called angela.png. Make sure that there are no typos and make sure that you've got all your capitalizations, lowercase, uppercase, exactly the same. It matters a huge deal to the computer, even though as humans we might ignore that. Now the next thing I've seen students have an issue with is their links don't work. So when they click on My Hobbies or when they click on Contact Me, it doesn't link to the correct page. Now again, this would be an issue with our hyperlinks. So you can see this, My Hobbies, links to a href that says hobbies.html. And this is the file that I want it to pull up. Now, if we go back to our file structure, you can see at the same level as index.html inside the same directory, there is a page called hobbies.html, there is a page called contactme.html, and these are spelled exactly the same as what we've got here. Now, I'm stressing this because I've seen so many students fall down here just because maybe they capitalize an H, or maybe they spelled this file incorrectly, or maybe they spelled this file incorrectly. Or maybe they created another folder in here and stored these two files inside. The code has to be able to find out where these files are in order for it to work. Now, the best way to assure that your code actually works is to make sure that you've got the same code as me, and you can check this if you go to this link. And if you have the same code in your index.html and you have the same structure here with all the same names, then it should definitely work. Now, if you have any of these problems troubleshooting, again, take a look in the Q&A section for this current lesson, and in there you should see a featured question where I've added some of my troubleshooting tips for uploading your website to GitHub. So now it's time for you to go through this process and upload your CV and your website onto the World Wide Web, and be sure to share a link to your project in the Q&A of this lesson so that we can all admire your hard work and what you have created. So that's all from me for this lesson. I'll see you on the next.